Right, morning everybody. I'm Tricia Hughes. I'm a lecturer at Sheffield Hallam. I started my doctorate in education in January 22. I'm just coming up to my last module, which is around data analysis, and did a pilot over the summer. So the title, what I'm interested in, is quiet learners in nurse education and what their experiences are of the curriculum. I'm interested for a number of reasons. First reason is I am a quiet learner, so I'm interested in how other people experience learning. But also because there is an emphasis, and over the last kind of 2 or 3 decades, there's been a shift towards kind of active learning, collaborative learning in the classroom. And certainly in nurse education and health education, this idea of interprofessional learning as well. So there's very much an emphasis on learners and students actively participating, and often the focus of active participation is on vocal and verbal participation. So that tends to be kind of how we measure whether people are learning or engaged. There's a suggestion and some criticism around measuring in that way, and there's a suggestion that may become performative. So learning becomes a performative action where students and learners feel that they need to prove they are learning by contributing in a verbal, in discourse, in discussion. And generally speaking, in education, somebody who is quiet, a quiet learner, is often seen as a problem. So it's seen as a problem that needs to be solved. So I'm just interested in, I suppose, looking at that really and seeing what that experience is for people. So the literature, there's a fair bit of literature in the educational evidence. Not tons, but enough. What I've found is that there's lots of ways that we describe quiet learners. So quiet, shy, reflective, reticent, introverted, silent. But the general consensus is that however we describe them, it's usually seen through the lens of a deficit. So quiet learners, however we describe them, they're seen as quietness is often seen as a problem that needs to be solved rather than just a way of being and the way that people kind of choose to learn. So some assumptions that are made, that have been talked about in the literature, are that if there's an absence of talk, we assume there's an absence of learning. People who don't necessarily engage in the classroom discussion are often seen as students who are not engaging in the learning. There's also a suggestion that we've kind of shifted away from this idea of social learning theory, and what our expectation has become is that it's a sociable learning environment. So we're expecting students to socialise, and not every student or learner wants to socialise and doesn't learn in that way, essentially. There's been some research about the way that educators view quiet learners, and that tends to be, we tend to use words like non-engager, passive, unprepared, misfits. So the negative labelling around those assumptions has been found to have an impact on belonging as well. So quiet learners often feel as though they're not learning in the right way, that they need to change something about themselves essentially in order to fit in. The other stuff that I looked at is about the relationship between quietness and academic success. So a lot of the research around active learning, so participation in the classroom, suggests that people who verbally contribute academically do better than people who don't. But there's also a relationship between conscientiousness. So that's an attribute that sits nicely within quiet learners. Quiet learners tend to have kind of conscientiousness as a quality, and that's directly linked with academic success as well. So there's this idea that maybe we need to look beyond just measuring the relationship between verbal contributions and academic success, and there are other things that we could start to measure. And as well, for us to kind of think as educators about whether people are reluctant to participate or whether they're just simply learners who prefer to reflect. So some of the research has involved and asked quiet learners what their experiences have been. So what they tell us is that they find that the expectation to socially engage in the classroom as they're learning is really frustrating, and it often means that they don't learn because they're thinking about kind of their performance and having to kind of speak and thinking about when they should speak and is it all right to speak now, and that kind of takes away the emphasis kind of like of what the learning in the classroom is about. They often feel a pressure to fit in, so kind of that has an impact on the sense of belonging. There's been some of the research that says it isn't just discomfort that people experience, but it's quite high levels of stress and anxiety, which again detract from people's ability to learn. Some of the research has suggested that some people just prefer lectures over collaborative classrooms, and maybe we need to kind of just accept that some people learn in that way. There's some other stuff as well around quiet learners saying there is an assumption they don't want to contribute verbally, but what they've said they find most useful is if they have space to talk. So often classrooms can be dominated by people who prefer to talk and are quick at thinking and answering, and what quiet learners are saying is that they just need a bit more space. They need 3 or 4 more beats to think, reflect, formulate what they're going to say, and then have the space to say it. So it's often that they've got things to say but can't kind of find the space in the room to say it. And what they've also said is that they quite like group work and quite like kind of talking at times, but they are quite clear that they like that to be structured. So saying to somebody, I'll introduce the concept, what do you think about that, might be quite difficult for a kind of a quiet learner to find space to think about that and have enough space to think about that. But they like group work that is quite structured, so they have specific questions that they need to answer. There's also something about the number of people in the group as well. So they suggest that kind of 4 or 5 people feels all right because they seem to be able to find the space. More than that, it becomes a bit intimidating for them, and they kind of feel that they're often in a position where they can't find enough space to speak, basically. So I'm particularly proud of my drawing of the umbrella, but there's lots of different reasons why people will be quiet as well, so it's not just always a learning preference. Some people will be really anxious about speaking and want to be able to speak, and want help with that, maybe want some direction or some support about how to speak out in class. There's also some research that suggests kind of things around background, social status. If people are the first person in their family to be at university, they're not sure about navigating that world, so kind of might be a bit more reticent to speak out. So there's lots of different reasons why people are quiet. I guess the message is that some people just are quiet and that's their preference. So it's not always a problem that needs to be solved. So I did my pilot over the summer and wanted to invite students who recognise and self-identified as quiet learners to come and speak to me about what their experiences are. So this is the flyer that I sent out to our 3rd year mental health students, and I just collected some common themes from the literature and tried to put a bit of a positive kind of spin on it to think about for people to think about what their qualities are. Did they identify with this? And if they did, would they come and speak to me about their experiences on the curriculum? So the gaps in the literature, it's not been explored within nurse education in the UK that I know of. It's been looked at in the US. I wanted to, some of the gap is around our knowledge around active learning. So we'll probably not look so much at people taking notes, nodding, eye contact, kind of reflecting and thinking. We tend not to measure those things. What we tend to measure when we're looking at active learning, and success is verbal contributions. So there's this idea that subtle engagement, maybe that needs some measurement as well and some focus. And as well, if we are going to adhere to and be driven by a student-centred approach, then we need some balance between quietness and talk in the classroom. So specifically for mental health nursing then, listening skills, great quality within mental health nursing because of the relationship between kind of therapeutic relationship and recovery and all the stuff that therapeutic relationship is around, kind of people's ability to listen, give people space. So they're qualities that perhaps we don't appreciate currently in the classroom for some of our quiet learners. Student-centred curriculum, so we need a bit of a balance. So we don't want people to stop talking. We just need the balance of kind of giving other people a chance to speak as well. And seeing quietness as a quality as well, and maybe having a different perspective on that. Also kind of having a conversation perhaps about the performative learning as well and shining some light around that, around kind of in education. And critical reflecting on that as educators. And also, accepting that some learners will want to develop communication skills and those abilities, but not assuming that all do. Yeah, so people who are anxious might need some guidance with that, but some people might be quiet because that's how they prefer to learn. So my approach is IPA, so I'm interested in what that lived experience is, and that's because there's not that much out there, so that felt like a really good place to start to ask people what that experience feels like. My plan is to ask third year mental health nurses, student mental health nurses, because they will have experienced hopefully enough of the curriculum to being able to kind of give me some information and probably develop some confidence, hopefully, and some experience that they might have had opportunity to be able to talk in the classroom. So I did the pilot study over the summer. I got two people that came to speak to me. One of them clearly identified as a quiet learner, and she gave some great information, and she was talking about how she liked to listen and process, and she brought her books with her to show me about how she would take notes and then go home and take more notes from those notes and kind of summarise some more. And she said that she really appreciated conversations with lecturers. What she interestingly said was that often she found if she was in the same group, certain students would repeat their stories in several kind of seminars and lectures. So she would have, for as lecturers, it might be the first time we've heard that story from one student. For other students, they might have heard it 4 or 5 times. And she felt that that detracted from her learning. So she got a bit frustrated when other students might dominate that conversation in the classroom. My other participant didn't actually identify as a quiet learner. She just came along to be quite helpful. And she was quite avert, so I taught her, and she's very kind of open, very talkative, very verbal in the classroom. But she was really interesting because what she was saying is, there are times I become a quiet learner, and these are the times that I become a quiet learner. So she said if she was outside of a familiar seminar group, if she didn't feel safe, she talked about if other students and other learners were able to articulate themselves really well, she felt that she would kind of just go into herself and think people know how to do this better. She also really interestingly talked about where she might sit when she felt like that. So she was in a big lecture theatre, she'd sit near the door, kind of a couple of spaces back, kind of hidden a little bit out of the way. So even though she didn't recognise herself as a quiet learner, there were circumstances that she kind of recognised she did become one. So my idea is that quiet learning isn't always a problem, that requires a solution. And hopefully what this will contribute to, once I've done the study and written it up, etc., will allow us to kind of think about what our assumptions are in education about quiet learners, and ask ourselves questions about whether we design a curriculum and whether we design learning with quiet learners in mind, rather than just necessarily thinking about students and learners who prefer like an active classroom. Thank you. That's it.
So, how many, are you just going to use Hallam as a repository of knowledge, or are you going to, do you want to go wider to other students and other universities? What's your...
Well, my intention was to use Hallam. But yeah, I suppose that needs some thinking through.
And in professional learning, are you using nursing only, or?
Yeah, and I think I would like to use mental health nursing only. I mean, I started off with nursing, but I moved towards mental health nursing, and I think some of that was, and I might be wrong here, but because I think I think this communication skills sit nicely and firmly for it's our tool, isn't it? It's the way that we work therapeutically with somebody. So I think I was looking for somewhere to kind of place it, so it felt like mental health nursing was the place to place it because of
So you've got interested, depends on the depth, depends on where you're going, but with non-occupational students, social work, maybe have that courses when the an open day tomorrow, you know, they all look at social work, come to us, seem to compare anything but some things. And I'll finish, but I've not doing a teaching session this morning to come and do this, and online, of course, in Teams.
yes.
The last time we did this session with all our cohorts, simulation before we go, I didn't get anybody responding. So is that quiet, or is that not? So I'm not with a scenario where they've got to work through it. Do you know what I mean? So it does. Have you considered online, or is that just?
Do you know, it started, to be honest, Steve, with online, because I think these conversations were happening during COVID. So we were having conversations about non-engagement because we've just got kind of these black screens and nobody kind of did engage. So I think that's where it started. But I suppose I have, but yeah, it's not something, as this is a personal reason, it's not something I'm particularly interested in Zoom. I suppose the interest is in the classroom, because I think a lot of people will become quiet learners perhaps on Zoom for various reasons. Yeah, yeah.
It's important, it certainly probably resonates with both sides, both the student and the teacher.
Yeah.
I've got a question around your methodology in your pilot study, because I do phenomenology. I supervise students with phenomenology. I love phenomenology.
Oh, brilliant.
Drawing out that lived experience, that really genuine that is sometimes lost in the approaches. But one of the reasons for doing a pilot study when you're using phenomenology is to check out the phenomenological interviewing and the style of using that open questioning. I was just going to ask you how you found that, because it's quite an art, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think as a mental health nurse by background, I think I initially felt quite confident when I was thinking about that kind of 6 or 8 months ago, and then actually going to do it, this idea that I didn't respond like a mental health nurse because I was very aware that I didn't want to overly sort of direct it. I did have a bank of questions, and I tried to stay close to that, but certainly with the second participant, it just went somewhere else, really. So yeah, I don't know if that gives any more information.
So what did you learn from that pilot study that you did that really brings you
I think there are a fair few things really. One of the things that I did think about was whether the focus just needs to be the curriculum, because students, the participants would talk a lot about placement as well. So that made me kind of wonder about whether I need to broaden that out a bit. Yeah. And I think there is sometimes the assumption, and we have these conversations, I suppose, as educators, don't we? Well, if people can't necessarily talk or have the confidence to talk in the classroom, how are they going to function in placement? And it'd just be interesting to see, is that our assumption, or is that actually what happens out there in practice? How do quiet learners function out in practice? So that was one of the things. Yeah. But I don't know if there probably was a lot more, but I can't remember. Is that all right? Is there anything that you come across then, if this is your area of expertise? Is there anything that kind of are common things that?
About doing phenomenology.
Yeah, about doing the interviews.
Well, it's really sort of that use of the hermeneutic circle, the expression, the use of language, really, that I think is really important to draw out of the interview. Because ordinarily, a research interview is quite didactic in some ways. It's I ask a question, you answer it, I ask a question, you answer it, and of course that's not the case. That's not the case in phenomenology. You ask a question and then you chase it with the person to go deeper into their experience and only bring it back to the next question when you explore that. And that can be really tricky, because you might have such a lot to say about the first question that you never get to question. So there's lots to think about, well, do you only interview them once, or do you allow provision for interviewing people more than once? And starting off at the very beginning and saying, this is all about your experience, and you might have an awful lot to say about a certain question, and just check out with you how you have time, and if we don't run halfway through, could you do a second sitting so that I can really give you the time to say what you need to say, really value and that sort of thing. But I actually did a toast story, a little story to help people understand why I was using phenomenology. We've got to talk to explain. I'll just do it really quickly. Send it to you, Tricia.
Yeah.
So for example, just a standard sort of pragmatic qualitative research can say, what did you have for breakfast this morning? And say, I had toast and marmalade and I had it sat in the kitchen. Okay, fine. Toast and marmalade sat in the kitchen. Phenomenological explanation of what you had for breakfast was, I got up feeling a little bit harassed. The children were bothering me. I had to get them ready for school. One of them didn't have lunchbox. I really wanted to make sure I got some breakfast, because otherwise I fly to work at 5 times yesterday morning. I'm really knackered. I need to get some breakfast. This is a priority. But I'm doing all this stuff for the kids. Opened up the door to get out with rows of lime marmalade, because it's like marmalade grown up. The kids can't have it, I love it. But like dropped the jar of marmalade. And then eventually it's like the kids are all sorted, and I'm sinking my teeth into this wonderful piece of warm toast with melted butter and lime marmalade on the top and breathing out. And that is a phenomenological experience of my breakfast.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
I can send it to you too.
No, that'd be right helpful.
That's absolutely fine.
Yeah, lovely.
Because that is the lived experience of my breakfast. The lived experience of my breakfast is not that I have toast and marmalade.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the context, it's the emotions,
Yeah.
it's the thoughts, it's how I felt physically, it's the interaction that happens at the same time. That's the lived experience, and that's what
Trying to tease out. Yeah. Yeah. No.
So I'm a bit precious about it, to be fair.
Yeah. Comes across a little.
No, you missed a bit about me saying about the butter.
Sorry, I didn't. I'm a quiet learner. I'm sorry, I have a question, but I'll direct it towards her. About phenomenology. You say phenomenology. I'm not sure if you IPA or.
Well, I use phenomenology.
Also,
Max van Manden's approach, but it's based on Heidegger's interpretive phenomenology.
so for instance, then I appreciate your example of analysis that you have given. Like there, she's using it as a method of data collection, and you go on then and use it as a method of analysis alone.
So, Tricia Hughes, as well as I, phenomenology is never intended to be a research method.
Yes.
It's intended to be a philosophy.
Yes.
And many people try to structure it into a research method, including Max van Manen, and actually Jonathan Smith created IPA some years ago with a very clear stepped approach and was criticised for it, really, about it having got too far from philosophy. And in more current text, 2022, which many literature cited in the work there, is a much more comprehensive account of how it's derivative from the original philosophers Heidegger and Gadamer. And Sartre particularly influenced Jonathan Smith as well, actually. And it's that existentialist perspective which comes through IPA, which also was Gadamer and Merleau-Ponty, also influential in the way that the research methodology drew out of this existentialism and phenomenology. So there's no fixed way of doing it, really, but actually bearing in mind that you are always researching, or Heidegger would say, the being, the self, and the time and place that person exists. And really, about you maintain those broad principles along the authenticity, then you create your foundation from there on. Does that answer your question?
It does in a way, but like, I don't understand, because there's a shift there, there's a difference between the phenomenology and the IPA, because you kind of took a critique side of IPA, but there's another side of IPA. So.
Yeah, well, it stands for interpretive phenomenological analysis.
I know, yeah.
Doesn't it? So, should we talk about this later? I'd be really happy to. It might be better to do it rather than
I am.
I was just interested, just because I have phenomenology as well and doing my PhD, and similar to what you're doing, I have that inside perspective. Obviously, with IPA, you have that kind of double hermeneutic thing of I hear what you're saying, and then this is kind of my understanding of that, and it's kind of the research and the participant coming together, which I really enjoy. So I just wondered about how you found, because you said that yourself you're in a quiet learner as well. Did you find that had an impact on your research?
Yeah, I suppose, because I suppose I have my experience as a quiet learner, and I've spoken to my supervisor a lot about this, and I actually found it quite difficult at first to write about that, because she was saying, you know, tell us a little bit about yourself and a bit about your experience of education if you kind of got this kind of insider perspective. But yeah, I think it's just something I you know, as I've done the data collection, I suppose I was particularly kind of like conscious of it. And what's really interesting as well, we had a session a few weeks ago with our kind of EdDoc group, and I had to show a piece of data, and what I got from the data was that one of the participants was saying, my interpretation was that she didn't have space, is what I interpreted, like this paragraph. And she was saying, there's a paragraph where she was saying she liked to listen to the lecturer, didn't like to listen necessarily to the students' kind of explanations, because she'd heard it time and time again and felt it was kind of a bit domineering. And interestingly, what colleagues, in how they interpreted and saw that was entirely different, because they're saying, oh look, she doesn't want to kind of what were the words they use, she doesn't want to kind of co-produce knowledge, and she just wants to be fed knowledge, and so that was really interesting, that from their perspective it was seen as quite a negative, but from my perspective, and I think maybe because I've experienced that, I was thinking, oh shit, this participant just needs space. That's what I see. So yeah, I don't know if that kind of explains any more, but yeah, I suppose it's interesting when somebody looked at the data to see how differently they interpreted that to what I did, and I suspect that's my positionality, I guess.
That's really important, that, isn't it? That what you're thinking about is exactly what the point is.
Yeah.
You know, that trying to capture that.
Yeah,
part
that
of
meaning.
your journey.
Mm.
You sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I was just thinking about the way you described at the start that being a quiet learner is often seen through a sort of deficit lens, and I was wondering about if that sort of deficit perspective is often reinforced through placement experiences, where often the experience is, or the expectation is, get stuck in and talk to people and do things. And if you are quieter in certain settings, I can imagine that's quite pernicious for students. Like it really could eat away at them a little bit.
Yeah, and I guess it's maybe a question for the profession as well as mental health nurses, is what do we value? You know, is it talk, or you know, or is it kind of listening? And maybe it's not either or, but I guess there's as much emphasis on listening. So we talk a lot about when we're maybe talking about therapeutic relationships and the importance of developing that and giving people space, but where do we enact that in the classroom? Where do we show that, and where do we you know, say that that's a real quality that people have got, that you're quiet, that means you'll be a great listener, and that's something that your more vocal colleagues can learn from, you know. So we also looked at some of the stuff that talked about what we tend to do for quiet learners is put on workshops and give them extra support about how they can kind of learn to vocalise and speak, but probably don't do that for people who speak too much. We don't always suggest that there's a workshop needed for people just to kind of quieten down and kind of give other people space in the classroom as well. And I think that it kind of, I don't know, demonstrates for me or illustrates that actually quiet learners are seen through a lens of deficit.
I have a number of questions floating around my mind. I'm just trying to decide.
Okay, the easiest.
I'm also a quiet learner. I like to sit back and absorb. And I remember my university experience many moons ago, being thrust into a world with other public school types who did a lot of talking, really shut me down, because I'm naturally quite shy. But what I was going to say to you was, how, if you're, I guess your hypothesis is that your quiet learner isn't doing, or is perceived to be not doing as well as your other learners, how would you go around measuring if that's the case?
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose my measure at the minute, or my interest, what I'm interested in exploring, is what the experience is. I think some of the research has already looked at kind of academic success. So I'm not sure right now, today, in this moment, that that's something I will measure. I have thought about measuring things like people's performance on placement. Do you know, because there are specific proficiencies around communication. So I have thought about measuring that against people's, so some people will have learning contracts, which mean that they don't have to speak out in class and don't have to do presentations. So that I have kind of wondered about that measurement, but perhaps not so much, it's a good question really.
Directly aligned, is it? Communication skills aren't directly aligned to learning all the other theoretical knowledge.
No, that's a good point.
Absorbing all of that as a quiet learner.
How do you know?
but not practicing my communication.
So I guess I would say they're two different kinds of studies anyway. IPA is not about measuring something that would be, maybe that's some kind of postdoctoral thing. You know, the emphasis is on people's experiences, I guess, at this stage.
Yeah.
We have a real diversity in the classroom. Have you had thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think a lot of and I think that's been one of the difficulties, Steve, is that there's so many reasons why people are quiet. So I started off looking at introverted learners, so looking at temperament, and then thinking, well, do I just want to look at temperament? And maybe I do, but a lot of the literature was around, the other stuff, cultural influences around social class, gender. So I'm not sure I've got an exact handle on that at the minute, and I think that my question has changed. The title of my question has changed a number of times. Introverted learners, and I went to silent learners, and I've gone to quiet learners, and but I don't know. The more I move away from it, the bigger the population of quiet learners are, and the different motivations. So, yeah.
Maybe Prof's grant as well.
Yeah.
Okay, Karen had a hand up. This is going to have to be our last question, but we're going to have time over for lunch.
It is a really quick one, actually, because as you've been talking, it's just occurred to me that when I was reading through my granddaughter's school recordings that he was going to engage as well in class talks, and I wonder, are you asking your participants if their learning style is similar to when they were at main school rather than higher education? Because they could have always been a quiet learner, or it could be the influence of
Of the higher education.
I'll leave you to think about that one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Lovely.
Great, thank you.